Hello, everybody. Looks like we have lots of people starting to join, and we'll get started here. We're going to give everybody just a minute to join, and we'll get started with our webinar. Okay. Drew and Waleed, are you guys ready to get started?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, let's get this rolling.
Awesome. Well, welcome to our first Windmill Comey webinar. Thank you guys for joining. We are going to talk about your PPM implementation blueprint, and the topic is empowering your PMO with the right tools and strategies. So just some brief introductions. My name is Courtney. I'm the president here for Windmill's PPM division. And I am so happy to be here with Waleed Salha and Drew Middleton. I'm going to let them introduce themselves in just a minute. But before we get started, one thing I'd like to do is go ahead and talk about a couple of little housekeeping items. So we have Q&A. You guys feel free to post your questions throughout the webinar. And some of those we may be able to answer in the middle, but most of them will be answered towards the end of the presentation. Additionally, we're going to have some polls throughout our conversation today. So while we are, letting other people come in, let's go ahead and have everybody answer the first poll. And let's see, it looks like we have quite a few people participating. So I'm going to bring that. I don't know if you guys can see that, but the question is, which best describes your organization? And we're really looking for what your current state is. And that helps us even further tailor what we're talking about and how we talk about it. Okay. Also, what we're going to cover today are quite a few things, but what we want you to know are the objectives and really what you're going to learn. So if you're implementing or you're considering implementing a PPM solution, what are the things you should do first? What are the features that you should enable for your MVP? So we talk about MVP, it can mean a lot of things to people, but in this context, it means your minimum viable product. And then what should you consider for your future phases? So do you bite off the all you can eat, or do you start this thing one step at a time? So what you're going to learn are some essential implementation strategies, including how to assess needs, identify stakeholders, and really to establish your vision. We're going to explore core MVP features such as project intake, resource management, tracking, and reporting. Additionally, we're going to discuss planning future phases, which may be the reason why some of you are here. We want to help you plan for managing change and how to create roadmaps for your ongoing PPM success. This is going to help you guys ensure smooth transitions and sustained growth in project management. Okay, so that's what we expect for you guys to learn today. We do ask that you feel free to take notes, and again, if you'll put your Q&A at the in the chat in the Q&A box, and then at the end of the webinar, we'll definitely address all of those things. Okay. So again, my name is Courtney, and I'm going to allow Drew and Waleed to introduce themselves.
Hi everyone. My name is Waleed Salha. I'm a Plan View Practice Manager at Windmill Software. Windmill PPM division. Drew?
And hey everyone, Drew Middleton. I'm one of the managing partners with Colmy Group. We are a consultancy that is laser focused on helping you improve your project management office. We're also very close partners with Windmill and with PlanView.
Thank you, Drew. All right, so let's get started. So the first thing that we will talk about is pain points. And I'm sure you are here to hear about those pain points. Why implement a PPM in the first place? So here are some of the pain points that Drew and I saw in the past with our clients. So let's start with resource management, visibility, utilization, and bottlenecks. It is a challenge to manage resources across multiple projects without a PPM system. PPM can improve visibility into resources and resource allocation, utilization, and bottlenecks. Of course, better resource management can lead to increased efficiency and cost savings. So that's one of the first pain points. The second pain point that we've seen is overall portfolio visibility and health risk. It is difficult, of course, to monitor project performance and assess risks without a centralized PPM system. PPM can provide comprehensive insights into an overall health and risk of project portfolio. Of course, and for sure, data-driven decision-making in managing project risks will ensure project success. Of course, standardization of project management processes, I would like to highlight that inconsistency in project management processes can arise without a PPM system. PPM can help establish standardized processes and best practices across the organization. Benefit of standardization and improved communication, reduced confusion, and increased efficiency. Let's talk about financial management. That is another pain point. It is a challenge of managing budgets, costs, and financial performance across multiple projects without a PPM system. And Drew, if you can see that picture, the people here that in this picture, they're very happy that they just implemented PPM and that provided them insight into their project financials, allowing for a better financial planning and controls. Improved financial management can result in cost savings, of course, and higher return on your investment. Project intake governance ensures strategy alignment, reduce pet projects. So that's another pain point that we've seen in the past. It is important to align projects with organizational strategy and avoid pet projects. PPM can help establish a formal project intake process, ensuring that projects are evaluated based on strategic fit and potential value. Better governance can lead to more focused project portfolio, increased ROI, and long-term organizational success. So now let's talk about our poll. Pain points.
I just pulled up our poll for pain points. If everybody could please take a minute and give us some insight. Which of the following pain points do you think would be most effectively addressed by implementing a PPM system?
I see some interesting answers coming in.
I do seem,
Sure.
Yes.
Huh. Okay.
Interesting.
Not all that surprising. Standardization of processes tends to be a common theme. Resource management, sure, but coming out a little more evenly. So we only have 16 respondents so far. There are 23 people in here. Let's see, that's 4 of us. So we're getting close. If you haven't answered it or you can't see the poll, I think if you look at maybe the bottom of your screen, it'll give you an indicator. So looks like maybe everybody. Yeah, okay. Wonderful. So look, we have a tie between resource management and standardization of project management processes.
Yeah, with
Good.
intake governance, a very close second, right?
Oh.
Just
Somebody else answered. Oh my goodness. Keep in mind, this is multiple choice, so I think you can select all that apply. Great. All right. Move on.
Yeah. Okay, so fantastic. Now we kind of have an idea on why we're implementing a PPM. Now we're going to talk about why we recommend a multi-phase approach. And, you could go big bang, right? You could just say, you know what, I'm going to put my PPM in and we're going to be live and that's going to be it. But installing a PPM into an organization that's already running projects, this is a big change. And as we all know, change is difficult, right? We could incur a lot of risk with this. We could upset a lot of people. We could damage the effectiveness of our projects. So we want to take a very careful, cautious approach when we do this. And our recommendation is a multi-phase approach. Also, implementing a PPM is not cheap. Let's face it, these systems cost some money to get implemented. And sometimes we can't afford all of the things that we want all up front. It might be something that has to go into the next quarter or even the next fiscal year. So again, a multi-phase approach might be a really pragmatic way to get a good PPM implemented quickly and then evolve and continue to improve it. And change is also difficult on your people, right? People just, their first natural human reaction to change is resistance. They're used to doing the job the way they're used to doing it. And there's an expectation that they're good at doing their job. And every time that you change the way they do something, they're going to have to learn again how to do things a little differently. And that causes a little consternation sometimes. So if, again, we can take this multi-phase approach, we can minimize the impact of those changes. In fact, minimize overall the changes on people and help them evolve, help them grow into this. And that's going to help with our adoption. So yeah, every time that we try to undertake a large change, there's always someone who says, let's just do this whole thing. But boiling the ocean doesn't work. We've seen places where we've tried that. It just is a recipe for disaster. So it's really our best practice to do a multi-phase approach. We can manage the risk that way. We're project managers. It's what we do. We're professionals in this field. And we know that risk management is a key attribute for a success of a project. So implementing a PPM as a project, let's manage the risk. Let's do it in a phased approach. All right. So now we know a little bit about why we're doing this, and we know a little bit about how we're doing this. Let's talk about what we're actually doing. What are the key functions that we want in our PPM? And that's one of the great things. Our first poll, we found that there is really some consensus. There's a couple of things that we find are incredibly valuable about a PPM, and we find that this is very much across the board. Every organization, every business is different, but when you implement a PPM, you're going to find the same benefits for the most part. So obviously we want to focus on work planning, work management. That's kind of the whole reason for doing this in the first place, right? Is to manage our work and get a handle on it. Obviously got to be in there. Resource management, financial management. We've seen how those are both important to the participants on this poll. And Waleed and I have seen that those are important factors for the customers that we work with day in, day out. Now, reporting, that's always important. One of the key things, key benefits of implementing a PPM is that now we're not looking just at projects in a siloed view. We're not looking at them in a desktop app or an Excel spreadsheet. We actually have the ability to gather enterprise data, aggregate that data, and use that to help influence the strategy or support the strategy in our organizations. Leaders love that. Your executives want to see reporting. Your stakeholders want to see reporting. So definitely one of the things that PPM is going to help you enable. And that reporting then can lead to strategic planning, the ability to actually influence what's going on in the project portfolio in order to achieve the strategic objectives of your organization. So we can look at a whole backlog of requested projects, and we can compare those to the strategic objectives that maybe it's the whole organization or some department has, and help use that information to prioritize. If you don't have a PPM for that, you're probably doing that in Excel spreadsheets. And we know how that works. Somebody gets the wrong copy of the spreadsheet, something bad happens. Let's get this into an enterprise system. Let's get visibility into our strat planning. Now, I've included RAID logs here, and not everybody uses that acronym in the same way. So we're going to go with the PMI, the Project Management Institute's kind of definition of that acronym. So what is a RAID log? Well, it includes your risks, your action items, your issues, and your decisions. These are things that projects have in addition to the work plan, in addition to the work breakdown structure. And these are things that often fall by the wayside. A PPM can help bring these to the forefront. So if we make them easily accessible, again, we can have enterprise views of this and see risks and issues across projects. This is a way to better leverage a tool that should be in your tool belt already, but might not be. And finally, we're talking about change management here. Changes are just a natural part of projects, right? We have a scope, we have a budget, we've got a schedule, and 2 weeks into the project, they all have changed. And if we don't have a good way of managing that change, we've got the Wild West. So a PPM can help with that. We can put some governance in place. We can put processes by which changes are evaluated, prioritized, and approved. This is something that an enterprise system is going to do that a desktop-based system or your Excel spreadsheets, well, you might be able to make them do that, but they're not going to do it as effectively. It's definitely something we want in our PPM. All right, so now we've got the why, the what, a little bit of the how. Let's talk about why we're going to put certain things in the MVP, the minimum viable product, or your phase one, versus why other things might be better off slated for later phases. And the very first thing I'm going to talk about here is user provisioning and SSO. Now, not everyone knows SSO. That's an acronym that stands for single sign-on. So with a PPM, typically what we're looking at are SaaS-based solutions. So they're software as a service or cloud-based. And what that means is that you can easily grant people access to them. It also means you've got to be careful to make sure that you revoke that access when somebody leaves the organization. Let's say that they leave under less than ideal circumstances. We don't want them still having access to our project management capabilities. We've got to shut that down. If we can enable user provisioning that's automated, we make life easier for administrators. We reduce any delays that people have when they're trying to get into the system. We just generally make things better. And when we can combine that with SSO, a single sign-on, we also add a layer of security that means as soon as somebody leaves the organization, their access to these systems is shut off and your data is secure. So part of MVP, absolutely. Another thing we want in our minimum viable product or our phase one, we've got to have an intake process. Right now, if you're just using Excel spreadsheets, or maybe it's desktop-based software, or whatever it might be you're using to manage projects, if it's not governed, then you've got the Wild West. Anybody can enter a project. And as Waleed mentioned earlier, we have the challenge of pet projects. Maybe they aren't aligned with the strategic objectives. Maybe they're not funded properly. One way or the other, they just shouldn't be happening. Well, if we have an intake process in our PPM, we can put some governance on that. We can manage that and make sure that the funnel of requests down to actual approved projects is properly cared for, properly managed, and does the job that it's designed to do. So your PPM should have that, and it's got to have it on day one. So that leads us into a little bit more governance, and that is the area of work management. As you know, in your work breakdown structure, you've got it's a project. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. All projects have to end. Well, maybe you need some governance around the ending of a project. Maybe there's things that have to be done before a project truly can be closed. Or maybe there are things in the middle that we have. A life cycle projects might go through in an IT, for instance. They could go through a very standard life cycle if we do requirements and then design. Then we build, we test, we train, we deploy. Very straightforward. But sometimes people have a little different take on things. If we put some governance on our work management process, then we can probably help folks adhere to that, and we have some standardization. That's going to make it easier when we're trying to do that enterprise level reporting. Now, I'm also going to mention the RAID logs again. These are one of my favorite tools. As a project manager, I always have a RAID log. And I can go to town on my RAID log. I can do a lot of things, especially in a PPM. There's typically a workflow engine. But for phase one, we don't really recommend that you go too deep on the RAID logs. At this point, what we're trying to do is just get people to use them. So we want to use some very basic functionality. If we look at a PPM like Plan Views Adaptive Work, that's a tool that we're going to use as an example through this presentation, we'll find that it's got these RAID logs right out of the box. Now, again, you could spend a lot of time and effort to configure workflow rules and very stringent governance around your risks, your action items, your issues, your decisions. But for phase one, there probably isn't enough return on the investment. And it could actually end up backfiring on you. You could get more resistance from the people who are trying to use these things because maybe you've put too much constraint in there. So we'd say, let's go basic. Let's just get some RAID logs, make sure people are using them. And here's a concept, we can start reporting on that data. So in addition to financial reporting or resource management reporting, we can look at reports on projects, including not just the work schedule, the budget, we can look at things like those ancillary items, the RAID log items. But again, this is phase one. So we recommend keep it light. Actually, you probably don't have a lot of data in your PMO, in your PPM when you first started up. We may have done some data import from the spreadsheets from whatever previous systems you were using, but chances are that data isn't enough to really create the robust picture that eventually we're going to build. So let's get some basic reporting out there in phase one. And we can always come back and iterate upon that as well. The most important thing for reporting is to think about, what do my executives need to see? They're the ones who spent the money, right? They're the ones who budgeted and gave you the go ahead, the green light to put in a PPM. So let's make sure that they're seeing some value in phase one. And chances are they're not going to be down in the weeds. They're going to be looking at reports and dashboards. And so that's what we want to get going for phase one. All right, I think we've got another poll now, Courtney.
Actually, it's the next one for resourcing and finances.
My bad. Yep.
But we can launch it now if you'd like.
That's okay. Yeah, Willie, do you want to take this one, resourcing and financial concerns in phase one?
Of course. Thank you, Drew. As we move into phase one, it is important that we address the resourcing and financial concerns to ensure its success. Let us discuss some key points that we need to keep in mind, such as resource management, cost tracking, and the role of timesheets on monitoring progress. The first one is basic resource management and capacity planning, Drew. Once implemented, you will be able to identify the necessary resources for a successful project. This will involve evaluating team member skills, expertise, and availability to allocate resources effectively. You will also be able to monitor resource utilization throughout the project lifecycle, ensuring that adjustments are made as needed in response to changing conditions and requirements. So when it comes to project assignments and staffing and hard versus soft booking of resources, project assignments involve allocating specific resources to tasks or projects, whereas staffing requests are focused on securing resources for future projects or tasks, which may not yet have been a clearly defined scope or timeline. However, when we talk about hard booking resources, it is a firm allocation of resources to a project, ensuring their commitment and availability. On the other hand, soft booking of resources represent a tentative allocation, where resources reserved without a firm commitment, allowing for a greater flexibility. Both approaches have their advantages. Hard booking provides certainty and allows for better planning, while soft booking enables organization to adapt to changing requirements more easily. Now, of course, you can combine through both approaches in the same project or in the same investment that you're running. Now, when it comes to cost tracking, budget planning, and forecasting, you'll be able to set a realistic budget for your projects, highlighting the factors that must be considered to ensure a solid financial foundation. You will also have a process for creating a comprehensive financial plan that effectively manages project costs and keeps expenditures in check, and that's very important. And of course, finally, you'll be able to regularly update your project forecasts based on actual performance. And that's very important too, enabling you to make data-driven decisions, adapt to unforeseen challenges, and maintain control over your project's financial health. Now, let's talk about timesheets and if it's worth the pen. Drew, I'm going to let you take on this once I cover it, to talk about it a little bit, because I know this is a very important subject for you, and we always talk about it in the past. As you know, in the world of project management, timesheets have long been utilized as a tool to monitor progress and allocate resources effectively. While the role in tracking project milestones and measuring resource utilization is undeniable, they also come with their own set of pros and cons. On one hand, timesheets enable managers to evaluate individual performance, identify bottlenecks, and optimize workloads. On the other hand, they can be time-consuming and may encourage a focus on hours logged rather than quality and outputs or outcomes. To implement an effective timesheet, and that's my advice, process in phase one, organizations should consider best practices such as setting clear expectations, streamline data entry, and fostering a culture of accountability. Drew, go ahead I know you would like to add your points in here.
Yeah, timesheets is one of my favorite topics because it's one of the most difficult decisions that our customers have to make, and especially the decision of, do we do them in phase one or do we try to do them later? So in some organizations, you have to do timesheets. There's just really no way around it. If you look at the PSA use case, and again, we're throwing acronyms out there, PSA is the Professional Services Automation use case. In that case, an organization is running projects on behalf of their customers, and they're billing their customers for those projects. So if your organization's doing that and you do time and materials billing, well, you kind of have no choice. You're going to have to do timesheets, and you got to do them in phase one. Okay, that's fine. You're probably doing them already. And so to migrate that into another system is probably not the end of the world. And your users are used to doing that. If you've got consultants who are working on those projects, they're used to tracking their time. But if you're an organization that does internal projects, chances are you're probably not tracking time for these folks, right? A lot of times, especially in the US, these are what we call exempt employees versus non-exempt. They're exempt from certain labor laws because they're salaried, and so they don't have to track their time. But it doesn't mean that we can't track their time. I'm not going to get into the legalities. There are certain things that have to be in place, but there is value in tracking time. And so now the question becomes, is the bang there for the buck? If I'm going to make people start doing something they haven't done before, what value am I getting for it? And so that's a real qualitative decision that we have to really think about. Is there going to be resistance to this? Am I actually going to get compliance where people are going to submit their timesheets? Or is this just going to cause so much pain for my employees, my folks, that they just actively revolt? So a lot of times what we'll say is, if you don't have to do timesheets up front, there are other ways to track your progress in a PPM. The project managers can look at each of the work items and we can estimate a % complete. Or we can ask our team members and say, help me out, where are we at this? Or we can even use an aggregation. We can say, well, let's just go binary on each task in the work plan. It's either not active yet, it's active but not complete, or it's completed. And when we roll that up across maybe it's dozens or hundreds of tasks in the work plan, we'll get a directionally correct estimate of where we stand in our project. So I would say, yeah, our recommendation for a phase one, if you've got to do timesheets or you're doing them now, yeah, put them in. But if you don't have to do that now, that might be something that you want to hold off for a next phase or a further evolution once people are a little more accustomed to working in the system.
So I love some of the responses that we have coming in from our poll. Thank you guys so much for participating. Webinars can be tricky because we can't see you, we can't hear you. So this is your chance to have a voice. We really appreciate it. It's really interesting to see the resistance concern around timesheets. And I think we probably all have opinions about time tracking and what is the value of time tracking. And as you may have guessed, both Windmill and Colmy were both professional services organizations. So certainly we do track time. But what about that time that all of our people are working on stuff that matters? It's not billable, but it really does matter. I think one of the biggest ways to empower your team members against resistance is to give them that moment for them to say, hey, I was working on this too, right? I accomplished this as well. And it allows people to really address all of the things they're doing in a way that's reportable. So I think there's so many positives for team members to be able to track time that's certainly something that we can help you address as well.
Yeah, we call that the WIFM, the what's in it for me.
Yes.
We can help them understand what's in it for them. They're much more likely to get on board, and they'll give us good ideas too and help us out.
Exactly. Awesome.
All right.
Very good. Okay.
All right. So we've gotten through phase one. Congratulations. We have a PPM. That's fantastic. Now what? And that's where we start to talk about phase two and beyond. It doesn't necessarily have to be a phase one, phase two. It can be a phase one and an agile process where we iterate upon this. It's evolutionary. But the beauty of a PPM is a good one, at least, something like a plan, view, adaptive work is going to grow with you. It's going to give you capabilities that aren't necessarily enabled in phase one, but now we can start looking at them in future iterations. So let's talk about a couple of those and what they might be. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. So this is just some of the things that we find our customers saying, now it's time, let's take a stab at these. Resource management is one of the single biggest factors that drive organizations to say we need a PPM. Well, we're doing basic resource management in our phase one, right? We talked about getting hard bookings and getting people assigned to their projects. So phase two, or at least sometime after, it might be time now to talk about some advanced resource management. Things such as placeholder resources. Perhaps you've got project managers who say, yeah, I want to staff up my project, but I don't necessarily know the named individuals are going to go on it. Well, let's put on job titles or roles. Perhaps we have a project that's going to need an architect, a front-end developer, a back-end developer, and a database administrator. We might not know who they are, but we know what they are. We know when we're going to need them. You can build a project schedule in a PPM using those types of placeholder resources, and then the resource managers can start to really show their value by helping the project managers to replace placeholder resources with named resources. We can also start to look at the skills matrix. We don't really recommend trying to deploy a skills matrix in your MVP, in your first phase, because the skills matrix is terribly helpful, but also somewhat costly in terms of the overhead to maintain. People are always gaining skills and, frankly, in some cases, losing skills. If you don't use a skill, it becomes somewhat stale or a little bit rusty. And we want our skills matrix to be up to date. So this is a good time to start looking in that and to say, is this something worthwhile? Is it something that's going to help us by adding the value of letting us choose resources based on something more than their job title, on the skills that they bring with them? The next thing for a phase two that I would really encourage folks to look at are integration considerations. Now, we didn't even touch on this in phase one. That's not to say there won't be some integrations needed in phase one, but you're definitely going to have to minimize or limit the number of integrations. And the reasons for that is, well, it's the same reasons we're doing a multi-phase implementation in general. Integrations are difficult. They're always a little bit harder than we think they're going to be. Now, when I say an integration, you might not know what I'm talking about in relation to a PPM. So we'll think of a couple of examples here. One integration might be an upstream system that's going to send data down to our PPM. Maybe you've got a CRM, a customer relation management system. And so you have opportunities in there. And when an opportunity gets to a certain point, we say, yeah, it's likely to be one. Let's put a project in our PPM. So that's a great integration where we can change the intake from a manual intake of project requests to an integrated intake coming from an upstream system. Or we could have a downstream integration where data in the PPM is generated, refined, and now it's ready to be pushed somewhere. That could be financial data. If we think about our project budgets and our project forecasts and costs, well, maybe the forecasts just stay in the PPM, but the budget, that might need to come from the financial system, or it definitely needs to be in there. And our actuals need to get into that financial system as well. So integration is definitely something to look at in a phase two. If you've got to have them in phase one, make sure you're budgeting time for them because they are time consuming. They are a bit complex. Phase two, you probably have a better idea of what your data is going to look like in the PPM at that point too. So your integrations will be easier to build just based on that.
One thing I've noticed too, Drew, for integrations in phase one, they, even when they're, I'll say, pretty well planned for, they don't tend to go. They don't tend to happen. I would say maybe 10% of all planned phase one integrations have ever really come to fruition. And the reason for that, in my experience, is the fact that they're implementing the very system that would allow them to plan for said integrations. And so, the ability to plan and really truly understand the requirements takes a little bit of time in the system that you're implementing.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, integrations, complex, difficult. Well, these are all the reasons we did a phased approach. And as Courtney mentioned, they're all the reasons you're putting a PPM in. So help yourself. Put those in a later phase. Let the executives know we're going to do this. We're going to budget for it. But right now might not be the time in that phase one. So speaking of budgeting, that's another aspect of a phase two or an evolutionary process. We can get better and better at that. So for instance, if we're going to do a phase one and a phase two, can you pay for them all at once? Do you have the necessary funding mechanisms so that you understand what your projects can actually spend? It could be in a phase two that we start to really iterate upon that. And we can look at those funding mechanisms. We can say, well, projects are not the lowest level of work in the organization. We actually have programs and portfolios, potentially. Not everybody does, but that might be a hierarchy of work that exists in your group. And it could be that those higher objects are funding the projects. So this might be a time to take your PPM to the next level by showing that, by building those objects out and making sure that we have processes by which your projects are getting the funding from those upstream items. One of the last things, but most important things I want to talk about here, and again, not an all-inclusive list, but something that's often overlooked, we want to incorporate feedback that we learned during our phase one. You guys have teams and you hired these teams for a reason. They're very smart people. Well, we want to learn from those smart people. So now they've been using the PPM for a little while. We're looking at our phase two and beyond. Perhaps they've been in there for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, and I'm willing to bet they've got some ideas on how to make things better. Now, sometimes it's a little tough to take that feedback. Sometimes it comes through a little rough around the edges, but that's okay. We can still put that feedback into we can put it into a PPM. We can create a backlog. Depending on which system you're using, in PlanView Adaptive Work, we like to use the requests, or sometimes we use actual tasks under a milestone, but we'll create a big backlog of people's feedback. And that's the beauty, again, of having a portfolio management system. We can prioritize. We can take those items, and instead of everything being a democracy or a free-for-all, we can actually put some attributes on them that help us to prioritize them so that we're doing work in an effective way, so that the best feedback is filtering its way up to the top. And frankly, the things that aren't going to work in our organization are filtering their way out. And that way everyone feels heard, and it's going to really help your adoption as well. So that is a huge recommendation from us. Make sure you're getting that feedback, make sure that you're making it visible, and make sure that you're actually doing something with it. Don't just put it on a shelf, but put that into a backlog and then manage that backlog, groom that backlog.
Exactly. And you can use the intake process and said new PPM solution to track all of these things, of course, as well. So I just want a quick reminder, everyone, as you're taking notes and you're hearing all of this great information, please put your questions into the Q&A box. We're going to address those here shortly. And we're going to launch another poll. You guys ready? Okay, what do you think you'd like to add or enhance in the second phase of your PPM deployment? Integrations, boom, right off the bat.
I see people jumping right in.
Wonderful. Okay. All right. Integrations, neck and neck. Oh, taking the lead. This is fun. Okay. I think we have one more person that has been participating. If anybody is multi-slacking, pop up and take our poll.
Vote early, vote often, right?
That's right. Exactly. Exactly. Okay. Well, I think we'll go ahead.
I think integrations carried the day on that one.
Oh, wow. Yes.
They do.
They did.
So 10 out of 16 respondents said integrations for phase two. Wonderful. Okay.
All right. So we talked about gathering feedback from our users. That's a best practice. Waleed, let's talk about a few other best practices.
All right. So when we implementing a PPM, it is crucial to adhere to the following best practices to ensure success, Drew. First, I would establish a clear goals and objective that are in alignment with your organization's strategic vision. This will provide solid foundation for decision-making and prioritization, and as well as a framework for measuring progress and success. And I've seen some questions in the session, in the Q&A, asking about directions and selling the solution to executives. So this is some of the best practices that where we can, use here, like which is establishing organization strategic vision. Second, engaging the stakeholder and foster collaboration by involving key decision makers, project managers, and team members from the start. And this promotes a sense of ownership and commitment to the PPM process, ensuring that all parties are aligned and working towards common goals. Finally, prioritizing effective communication and change management throughout the PPM implementation. This entails providing timely, accurate, and transparent information to all stakeholders, as well as addressing any concerns or resistance that may arise. By implementing a structured approach to change management, your organization can facilitate a smooth transition to PPM, enabling greater efficiency, accountability, and strategic alignment. So those are some of the best practices, and probably by just going through that, I've just answered some of the questions that I've seen in the Q&A of the webinar. Let's go to the next slide and talk about measuring PPM success and benefit realization. It is important to measure PPM success and benefit realization after you do your implementation. First, I would explore the identification of key performance indicators, your KPIs, which are essential for assessing the effectiveness and value of PPM initiative. By establishing relevant and measured KPIs, organization can set a clear expectations, track performance, and ensure alignment with the strategic objective. So that's very important. Next, I would dig into tracking progress and measuring success, which involves continuous monitoring and evaluating these KPIs to ensure the projects are on track and delivering the desired outcomes. Regular reporting and data analysis are crucial, of course, here in identifying areas of improvements and making data-driven decisions. It is important. And finally, the need for adapting and refining your PPM strategy over time. As organizations evolve and the business landscape shifts, it is vital to reassess and adjust your PPM approach to ensure it remains relevant and effective in achieving organizational goals. This iterative process helps organizations stay agile and responsive, promoting continuous improvements and maximizing the benefits derived from PPM initiative. That's it from me, Drew. Let's give the audience some real-world examples.
Thanks, Waleed. Yeah, as we mentioned when we started this, we've done hundreds of PPM implementations, and we've learned a couple of things along the way. I'd love to tell you that all of them were wildly successful. That may not be the case. Every now and then, things don't go the way we'd like, but we learn from that. So we're going to talk very quickly. I know we only have a little time left, but we'll talk a little bit about our successes and a little bit of the things we've learned from the more challenging situations. So just recently, we actually followed exactly our own advice here. We did a phased implementation, and we started with a phase 1. It was a very light, very fast implementation because we wanted to get to benefits realization as quickly as possible. And then we stepped back. As a consulting agency, we actually went dark in a planned way. This was what the customer wanted. And then we re-engaged a month later. And what we found was exactly what we wanted. First of all, they have great adoption. They love the system that we put in place, but they also see the opportunities. And so we have a ton of feedback from these folks. And they're asking now, these are the things we'd like to do in phase 2. Let's get rolling on that. So it's just proof that this process works. If you can afford to do it all up front, you may still want to consider not doing that, because the money is not the only consideration when we implement a PPM. We have to think about how people respond to that change. Now, some of the things we've learned, we tried to do an implementation for an organization that had 15 different PMOs. They were a massive enterprise organization. 15 different groups were managing projects in their own way. And somehow they all came together and said, we want a PPM, let's do this. But trying to boil the ocean was not a good solution for them. Now, fortunately, we were able to advise them and very quickly get them to pivot and say, let's find an early adopter group. Let's work with that group. While we were doing that, we formed, we called it a project management center of excellence. We brought all of those 15 PPMs together. We let them watch and even participate to some extent in terms of focus groups and participation requirements. But as we built out that first PPM solution, we made sure there was input from all of those 14 other PMOs, because they were stakeholders as well. And then we followed iteratively for each of those groups. So what turned out to be a terrific success started as what could have been an abject failure. Another challenge that we've seen with a recent customer is overly aggressive controls. If they take a command and control approach to project management, we think there might be benefit in that, right? We're going to now have standardization. But if we go overboard on that, then what we find is that all those great people that you hired are frustrated because you've really kind of locked them down too much, and they're not able to bring their creativity and their knowledge to project management. So we recommend taking a measured or a balanced approach to the command and control, to the governance, and to the standardization. So think about, what are you trying to get out of this? If we've got a report on the overall health of the portfolio to the executives, let's put governance in that allows us to do that. But let's also give our project managers the freedom to head out on their own, do things a little differently in some cases. We can still have templates, we can have governance, we can have the things that we need, but not to the point that it's constraining and that you end up with so much resistance, people stop using the system. So I know that was quick. There's a whole slew of things we could share here, but we want to give some time for your questions. So let's jump over to the Q&A.
Okay, I have the Q&A pulled up. I don't think it shares necessarily. So let's see what this does. So Ray asked, can you give us a range of costs for implementation? Great question. We can give you a range, Ray.
It's going to be a big range, right? Honestly, probably, Ray, the best way to look at this is how low can we go? And yeah, the range, how high can you go? Well, the sky's the limit. How low we can go, typically an enterprise PPM, you're not going to get into that for less than a few tens of thousands. So I would really think maybe a $20,000 price tag might be about the lowest you're going to go, simply because of the incredible functionality that you're going to be implementing with this, but also because the stakes are high. So we don't want to just wing it and throw it in there. Now, there are a lot of systems you can do where you just implement it yourself. A lot of no-code solutions, well, these aren't really code, but low configurability solutions. But that's not really an enterprise PPM, so I'm kind of excluding that. Courtney, Waleed, what do you guys think?
I would say similar. I mean, I would say 30,000 is probably closer to our smaller customers and our use case, I'll say our less complicated use cases. So that's one thing to keep in mind too. It's not always about size. You can have 1,000 people logging into this system, but if they're doing one thing, let's pick timesheets just for fun. If they're just doing one thing, if we're implementing a single process, that in and of itself could be a very low cost implementation. So it really depends on, I think if we kind of pop back over into your key functions. So if we think about key functions, okay, and you're looking across, all of these key functions, these all address different processes, different areas within your left to right. And so if you're looking for the big bang and everything, even if you're running the MVP, I would say, still our smaller implementation sizes or costs, they start at around $25,000, $30,000. But we've seen them go, into the millions, depending on the complexity. So yeah, sorry, that's a very, very broad answer, but you did ask for a range. So,
and to be fair, I think we're talking about as service organizations. That's what Windmill and Colmy Group are. That's the services to help you get set up. That's probably not even touching on the license costs. Keep in mind that you're going to need to shell out some money for those licenses.
Yeah, for sure. All right, cool. Jim, you asked a question. You said, I'm currently implementing incrementally, nice, a PMO solution for our org. I'm midway through a series of interviews with key stakeholders to build the roadmap of features and capabilities that we might implement, which we love, by the way. An issue that I'm facing is all project managers desperately want change, more process, and government. Some of the senior leaders believe we are too small as an organization, probably to accomplish the above, and you're trying to get alignment. So how do I get alignment across the organization on this? What are your tips? So how do we satisfy what your project managers need versus what your senior leadership thinks is what you need, right? What do they want? Great question, Jim.
Yeah, I'll jump in, and then we want to get other folks on here as well. But first, Jim, I'll just say you're in a great situation because your project managers are asking for change. That indicates that they recognize that they could be doing more, doing things better, being more efficient. So that's great. You've got a catalyst for change there. And if the senior leaders believe that you're too small as an organization, well, that means they see benefit. They see there's value in your PMO. So this is a win-win. I think the trick now is you probably should put a business case together. You can sort of outline, here's what we believe the benefits are. Here's how the executives are going to benefit from this, because they always want that with them. Here's how the organization as a whole is going to benefit. Perhaps you can do some measurement on the current projects. Are we successful in staying on schedule? Are we delivering the scope that we agreed to? Are we experiencing a high number of issues that we could have headed off when they were risks and not yet issues? If you can put all that together, you can then set some targets and say, this is what we believe a PPM is going to help us accomplish if we invest in it, if we put the right effort into doing it right. Waleed, what do you think?
I would say I agree with you, Drew. And another thing I would recommend highly is having a demo for the senior leaders on the PPM application, that different ones, of course. And once they see all the great things that they will get out of the solution, and maybe using the use case that you'll present to us, then they will be convinced. They will see the value, definitely.
Yeah, and I think Tony, I think you have a similar question that was answered via like a messaging, but yeah, how do you approach the mindset of executives? I think you use the word antiquated, but that is kind of what it boils down to, right? How do we educate our executives on the value of one of these solutions? And I think looking for case studies, which we can help provide you with on, the ROI is what it comes down to. What does it cost? What am I going to get out of it? What was the acronym you said earlier, Drew, for time?
With him, what's in it for
with him? Exactly. So, really working closely with those of us that you're here with on the call to help you with that, I think is the first step. But there are all sorts of resources to help you really educate on the value and the benefits. For sure.
You might not like this, everyone, but I'm going to cut those executives just a little bit of slack. They might be antiquated in their thinking, but their intentions are correct, right? They want to do what's best for the organization. So what we can do is help them by, instructing them, showing them the new world, showing them how agile project management can be effective, showing them how enterprise project management and enterprise reporting on that data can actually inform their strategy. And you'll open their eyes. I think that you'll find their antiquated thinking might start to shift a little to a little more modern thinking.
Yeah, I would agree. So Jim, you asked another question, which I think is fantastic and may be of benefit to everyone. When implementing a PMO, so we're talking specifically about a project management office, how important do you feel it is to deliver some basic training and principles on project management to your staff? So you're using this as a means to align your internal culture with the how to do project management. I am a project management instructor, so I will say it is incredibly important. Some basics of a day in the life of a PM for those that will never spend that day is wildly successful in any circumstance. So I would definitely think that's very important. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'd 100% agree. The challenge is you're hiring good people, but they all come with a different background. They all have a different perspective on things. You might have some PMP certified folks. That's a project management professional certification that comes from the PMI. You might have some Prince 2 certified folks. You might have folks who went through the School of Hard Knocks and just learned this as they went. So not everybody's starting from that same foundation. So if you can do some training, even for the people who've already got certifications or have been doing this for years, what you're helping to do is aligning expectations and aligning on a standardized approach.
Yeah, for sure. So Nympha has a couple of questions around payback. I think you're talking about payback for the investment. So your ROI, as far as how much this is, what is the general payback? I don't know if we're talking about payback period, or we're talking about actual money, or we're talking about process improvement, but it's hard for me to answer that exactly the way that you've asked it, but I would say that in most cases, the payback period is as quickly as we can get you up and running and live with that phase 1 MVP. And depending on how many manual processes you are automating will really determine, your true ROI. So how many of you guys are using 15,000 spreadsheets that are sitting in emails and all over different shared, folders and in the cloud, and, who knows where they are, as opposed to having a mothership. So that's my favorite term for PPM systems is, where is the mothership? Where is the reasoning behind all of this? Where do we go to find the answers to all of these questions? And if the answer is somewhere in an email folder or somewhere in SharePoint or Teams or Slack or any of these tools that we use for the kind of the quick, communications, if that is the answer, I would say your payback period is pretty rapid.
Now, if it's the finance organization who's saying, okay, you want so much money to implement this, I've got to know when are we going to see a return on that investment, then you've got some homework to do. I think what you have to do is look at what are the pain points that are driving the implementation? What are those pain points costing your organization? And what's a realistic time frame in which we think we're going to solve that pain? So for instance, if the problem is resource utilization, we don't think that our resources are being effectively utilized. Well, that's a tough one because without a PPM, it's probably hard to measure how much are your utilization rates off. Are they, if you're targeting a 75% utilization and you're hitting 50%, you've got a problem. But if you have no way of measuring that, you've got a bigger problem because there's no way you're going to answer finance's question. So you probably have a little homework to do there. That's the tricky part without the PPM is getting the baseline measured and then being able to show the improvement.
Right. So Drew, what are the conclusions and next steps? We have some key takeaways, call to actions.
Yeah, I think key takeaways, if you're going to implement a PPM, number one, go in with a plan, right? We're project managers, so be planful. Get help. We've done this many, many times. Obviously, this is what we do for a living, so we want your business. But we want your business because we want you to be successful. The average PMO has a lifespan of something like 3 to 4 years, and that's terrible. It costs organizations so much to have to recreate the wheel every 3 to 4 years. If we can help you extend the lifespan of your PPM, your employees are going to be happier, right? Because they're not constantly having to reshuffle. You're probably happier because your job's a little more secure, and your organization's going to be happier because now you've got more effective project management and they see the value. And that's why they want to keep you on.
Yeah.
In terms of a call to action, then I would say, go do it. If you think a PPM is the right thing for your project management organization, yeah, it's time to go and look at them, find the right one, get some help with that if you need it, and then make sure that you have those pain points identified so that you can measure your success. Waleed, what about you?
And we're actually pretty much at the end of time.
Oh,
So
we're right at
I know. Yeah, we're out of time. We're going to be, sorry, Waleed.
No, I'm good. I'm in agreement.
Okay. Yeah. So we're right at the top of the hour. Get in touch with us, you guys. We would love to talk to you further. And we're going to be continuing this webinar series. So just keep an eye out for that as well. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you, Waleed, and thank you, Drew. You guys are great. And this was really informative. For those of you that asked questions in the Q&A that we didn't answer live, we'll be sure to get with you and answer some of those questions for you. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good one. Thanks.